Nearly everyone agrees that the next Total War game is 40K, but that doesn't mean historical games are dead. If anything, it's a chance for the Creative Assembly's historical series to distance itself from the fantasy games, designing a different play experience for a different kind of player. And in this video, I'm going to tell you how I think it can be done. Hi, I'm Cody Bonds. I have a master's degree in archaeology from media, and for the last 20 years, I have been playing Medieval 2 Total War, which is a thought that makes my arteries harden just by saying it. The framework for a new Medieval 3 Total War actually already exists with Total War Pharaoh and Total War Three Kingdoms, and it could make a truly epic game that captures the spirit of medieval Europe unlike anything we've ever seen before in a game. But before we go into what pieces can be ported from other Creative Assembly games, let's talk about the when and where of Medieval 3's setting. I recently put a poll up on my channel and asked you what you were looking for in playable timelines and geography for Medieval 3, and discovered that most of you seem to have no idea how the medieval period in Europe is defined. So for context, it's roughly 500 to 1500 AD, 1,000 years from the fall of the Roman Empire to the fall of Constantinople, which is also the Roman Empire. And yes, I do think about the Roman Empire at least 20 times a day. Most video games set in the medieval era begin in the year 1066, as this is the date of the Norman Conquest and marks the beginning of the High Middle Ages, where all the big players are already settled and the mass migrations of the previous 500 years have finally stopped and settled down. By 1066, you have your heavy cavalry and combined arms assaults with infantry and archers. I mean, it's everything you think of when I say medieval warfare, including trebuchets and castles. And I wouldn't be surprised if Medieval 3 also started in 1066. It's one of those dates just everybody knows, though I would hope they go back just a bit further for selfish reasons, as I would love to play as the Anglo-Danes under the control of Harold Godwinson and kick out that perfidious bastard, which is a very specific view of history that involves a lot of people, you'll notice right there. You see something similar in Crusader Kings 3, where important dates and key figures are bookmarked so you can play as them. Total War tried to do something similar with chapters in Total War Three Kingdoms, but here in Medieval 3, it could really shine. Imagine you can click a start on the Norman Conquest with Harold Godwinson, William the Bastard, Harold Hardrada, and Gruffydd ap Llywelyn. The Scottish War of Independence with Robert Bruce, Edward Longshanks, and William Wallace. The Second Crusade with Richard I and Saladin, the Hundred Years' War, the Reconquista, the Borgias. You can even back it up a bit and do Canute's North Sea Empire with him and Edmund Ironside, bringing in some Viking flavors. That's the beauty of saying it's a medieval game. You have a huge swath of history to cover. I would love to see DLC set in 500 AD after the fall of the Roman Empire, where you play as an Arthur-like figure rising to power again, or a Viking DLC, because while I loved Thrones of Britannia, nobody else played it, and those stories are ripe to be told. These are all specific points in history with specific playable persons and personalities you can drop in as. But to do this, you will need one hell of a map, because building lots of tiny maps is just not a good use of anyone's time. Using the Normans as a baseline for size of a potential game, well, they conquered England, they conquered Sicily, the Levant, and parts of North Africa, and it broadly gives you the boundaries of a European medieval world, the same one we saw in Attila, Rome 2, or even Medieval 1 way back in the day. Because while Marco Polo did go to China and Leif Erikson went to North America, these random acts had zero impact on the larger Europe at the time, and it wasn't until later that big colonization and empire building occurred. The most a ruler or a king from this era would see from these trade expeditions was a few fun curios and from the far corners of the world, and maybe a description of how weird the foreigners looked, and maybe they should not try the foreign food when they get there. I mean, it's certainly possible for Total War to stretch itself around the globe. There's nothing technically stopping them from doing that. But eventually, you have to choose between breadth and detail. And personally, I'm much more interested in a filled out and fleshed out Europe than a globe with lots of empty spots on it. So how big are we talking? Let's throw some numbers at you. Three Kingdoms' size of the game was 200 settlements. That's the same number that was in Rome 2 and Attila. and that's pretty much been the baseline for quite some time. Warhammer 3 doubled that with its Immortal Empires map to 353 settlements, and Pharaoh Dynasties has nearly the same number, not including the tiny outposts on the map. And some mods for Rome Remastered have even pushed its game map to nearly 1,200 regions. For comparison, Crusader Kings 3 has 2,646 counties to be interacted with in the base game, with some mods pushing that to over 7,000. And that's fine. What I'm saying is, there is no limit to the amount of detail that can be included in a game. This is all a choice. How wide do you want to go versus how detailed you want to go and where your focusing is. And for Total War, the focus has for the longest time been on warfare, hence the name Total War. So why doesn't Total War also make a 2,000 county map? Well, the mantra has been fight battles, conquer the map, paint the thing your color. But when a map gets too large, people won't do it. So they stop making bigger maps. So maybe the problem here is an underlying philosophy issue, and maybe it's time to change the objective and realize that most people will never finish a campaign, and instead give them a detailed sandbox to play in. I mean, is your goal to conquer the world? Or is it to create a dynasty that lasts 300 years like the Plantagenets, going from Henry I from Richard III? They fought amongst themselves, they fought against peasants, they fought against the church, and they fought against foreign invaders. And their exploits have filled countless books, even though the geographical area they were involved in is roughly the size of Texas. Maybe you shouldn't be trying to take over the world as a small Irish clan. Maybe a sheer sense of scale and distance is exactly what this game needs, making crusades and distant campaigns to conquer foreign lands feel like a real undertaking. My biggest complaint about Rise of the Republic for Total War Rome 2 was that every city was so close together that they were within a turn's march from each other. You have to fill up this world with something interesting. Now, I mentioned Thrones of Britannia earlier because it's a game I've always enjoyed, and I'm glad to see the community is finally coming around on it. In Medieval 2 Total War, the whole of the UK was 7 cities. In Thrones of Britannia, it was 200. Now, I'm not saying we need 200 cities for just the UK in a Medieval 3 map, but I am saying that if you take its 63 major cities and made each one of those its own full region, you would have a very detailed canvas to paint on. Because historically, each of those regions would be ruled by their own lord with their own personality and their own goals that may not align with your king's. When you zoom too far out, Wales becomes a single province backwater, Portugal becomes an afterthought, and the importance of Norman Sicily becomes muted. And small places have big impacts in the medieval world. There is no nation-state of England. That notion occurs after the medieval era. England is instead a geographically defined area controlled by a lord who then divides it up to be managed by his sublords because it's too big to control it all personally. And it's all built on that personal contact and commitment top to bottom. The medieval era isn't about controlling nations. It's about managing people, something Total War 3 Kingdoms did very well. There's court politics, intrigue, desires, and shifting alliances. You play as a king who has his own underlings, and each of them have their own little regions, and he relies on them to raise army to then join his expeditions. They betray, they swap sides, and they rebel as they see fit. A system that Mount and Blade Bannerlord beautifully models with its supplies and force cohesion system, where experienced generals can keep armies together longer. I mean, why do people follow you? Because they love you? Or because you're a cold-blooded bastard they wouldn't dare cross? These reputations are earned by your actions in a campaign, and in older titles, if you lost a battle, your general's rating could go down, and the amount of dread that you inspired in other people would lessen. The simple act of having an individual lord raise his own army and retinue before joining your king's army and his larger force is astoundingly historical, as that is the core of the feudal system, where nobles owed service and scutage to their lords. You need these people to like you, because without them, you have no army. There are lords I should never trust, and it's like making a deal with the devil. But if I have to swallow that pill and give him the new territory that I'm about to conquer, just so I can expand one step further, I will do so. And doing it this way changes the focus of the game. No longer is it about constant expansion, and instead it takes a backseat to local lord management. Imagine every lord has a bar that measures their satisfaction with your rule, and every settlement tracks the happiness of its nobility, its church, and its peasants, each with a different effect if you are disappointing them. People spend more time on a campaign map than in battles. 3-1, 4-1. So the focus of the game should reflect that, and the amount of time and effort going in should reflect that as well. Total War games have traditionally been designed to try and get you into a fight as fast as possible, and that has led to, among other things, a replenishment problem. You've all encountered the replenishment mechanic. If a unit is injured, they will slowly replenish over time. In older Total War games, like Medieval 2, you would actually have to take it somewhere that you control and re-recruit them, literally retrain them. And that slowed down the pace of the game, and it forced you to back up and retreat and do something other than continuing to push. Because if an army can replenish its lost troops anywhere, there's no need to ever disband them and return home. Isn't more fights every turn more fun? And traditionally, retreating a Total War army back home hasn't been fun. There's very little to interact with once you've conquered a province. It's just constructing another building each turn and then moving on. Nothing else is happening there. I mean, in late game, your base is so far from your main one, you're recruiting new units on the far edge. Nothing is happening in the center anymore. There's nothing to engage with. But what if Lord Buckinghamshire had to be in Buckinghamshire to actually recruit more units? And the other lords couldn't recruit troops from his land, as technically it is his domain. That's a radical departure for how Total War does recruitment now. Pop-up events have long been a thing in strategy games, but what if an event in Western Wales could only be resolved by the Lord of Pembrokeshire while he was in Pembrokeshire? Imagine battles where it's not a full 20 stack. It's a lord and his retinue versus a small company of bandits or another lord and their retinue. Smaller, tactical, interesting, important engagements that have a larger impact on your campaign so that you want to play them. It makes every lord an individual and forces you to think of them as persons instead of stats in an army. Permanent armies weren't a thing until after the medieval era. A lord may be following your army across the Alps, but eventually he's going to want to go home and take care of his own business. Peasant uprisings, land disputes, squabbles with other lords. Your empire isn't one big blob that obeys you. It's 30 guys controlling 30 provinces who agree that they serve you for that moment in particular, and at the drop of a hat would sell you out if it meant taking their neighbor's lands and his second best milk cow. The system of 30k could replicate the shifting allegiances of the Middle Ages. You give a lord a title, Lord of Sussex, and it means something. Hell, you can even make someone a bishop. Right? And it forces them to occasionally choose between you and the church for certain dilemmas. Bishop Odo of Bayeux led men in battle and staged a coup at one point, yet he was still a bishop, and he still had to pay homage to Rome. At one point, a prince of England was also the Duke of Normandy and had to swear fealty to the King of France at the same time for certain lands, but not his English lands. And even as the King of England, he was still technically a French subject. And it's messy. It leads to conflict. And that's fun in a game. Religion in this era is equally messy. Crusades and jihads existed. Honestly, Medieval 2's system for both of them was great. Just copy and paste that over. No changes. But bishops weren't going around converting people in this era. You don't take them up, chop them on the province like a chess piece and expect the number of Christians to go up. That's just not how it worked. Treating the Bishop of Durham as the ruler of Durham, who is also a vassal of a larger Catholic faction, would make religion tangible. The church can also be bargained with for land and assistance, and the Pope in Rome leads the Papal States. This is where the multiple allegiances come in, though they are often conflicting. A lord could be aligned with both England and the church simultaneously. And the generals themselves should ideally have skill trees so you can help develop them as you play, where you can put points into diplomacy or combat. This also brings in other types of generals. Maybe there's a bishop-specific tree, or a noble tree, or a peasant tree. Eleanor and Aquitaine and the Empress Matilda were powerful figures in their day who raised armies, led revolts, and actively engaged in state politics. Unlike Joan of Arc, they may not have been actively fighting on the battlefield, but on the campaign map, they are forces to be worked around and should be present and interacted with. I mean, in Three Kingdoms, Zhuge Liang appears in battlefields surrounded by his guards, even though he never actually fought in battles historically. And I see no reason why that exact system can't work here for women, princesses, dukes, bishops, you name it. Traditional non-combatants surrounded by a guard, just like they would have been historically. Speaking of conflict, Pharaoh dynasties and Three Kingdoms do a great job of introducing new mechanics and strengthening old ones for battles. And I do mean records mode in Three Kingdoms when I say this. I'm not advocating for Richard the Lionheart to be a single unit with a flaming sword that he can activate and then, kill everyone by himself. But records mode in Three Kingdoms does have a lot to like. It feels good to play. Charges have weight. Infantry, when braced, do feel like they're actually standing up against something. You can feel the different tiers of troops having an effect on the battlefield. And I do like that shooting fire arrows actually lights things on fire. I'm not going to argue about fire arrows in battle here, but if I put a flaming shot into a city or a town, I expect it to light on fire. It's just a fun gameplay mechanic. Archers in general, though, do need a speed boost. The idea of having them firing all at once is from 1600s gunpowder lines. I mean, that's why you say, ready, aim, fire. They don't fire, they would loose, if anything. Their range should be drastically increased. We're talking about 150, 200 yards on certain longbows, and their fire rate brought up as well. Longbowmen could fire 10 arrows in a minute, and that's hundreds of arrows in the air at any given second. A constant pinning fire that slows advancing units down, damaging their armor, reducing their morale, breaking levy units, and all you have to do is really reduce the damage chance against top-tier armored units. Then you're golden. And these are all changes that the most popular mod for Medieval 2, the stainless steel mod, did. By the way, Pharaoh Dynasties already has all these features in it. Units in Pharaoh have armor, and that armor impacts their speed and their exhaustion rate. In battle, that armor can be damaged, and it reduces its effectiveness. And it's brilliant. It's a wonderful system that just port the thing wholesale. In fact, if Say Sophia ever gets a chance to work on their own game again, I hope it's Medieval 3, because they have that layer of dedication and historical research and the willingness to push that I just adore. Friggin' formations, shield walls, shieldtrons, wedges, all of it. Back, please. Battlefield deployables like spikes and trenches. I mean, if you're a defender, give the defender an advantage. I mean, hell, maybe the player should get to choose what type of terrain the battle's about to be fought on if they're the defender. Do they want an open field, or do they want to get the high ground by default? And since we're talking about both sides agreeing to a battle, bring back raiding stances and ambushes, right? Give me a different type of battle to fight. And for the love of Pete, never make a map that's just one hill in the middle. Sieges are, sieges are their own thing. Generally, Pharaoh has some of the series' best sieges, but I prefer the unique maps of Thrones of Britannia, and I don't really like the holding checkpoint system. I'd rather say you either take it or you don't. I'm not really interested in holding capture areas. I'm not playing Warhammer. But surrounding a place and starving them out on the campaign map should just be a viable tactic. Because most generals avoided sieges in the medieval era. I mean, we're 30 years into making Total War, and they still haven't got sieges right, and people still arguing about them. So honestly, in Medieval 3, I'll be skipping sieges, just like I'm going to skip this section. Units pushing other units. Pharaoh brought it back from other Total War titles, previous ones, and I'd like to see more of it happening quicker and more obviously. Stirling, Bannockburn, Fulford, all of these battles have men giving ground in front of an enemy advance and being forced up against rivers that they then fall into and drown. Put it another way, when you're losing a fist fight, you back up and you give the other guy some space. And if they advance on you, you back up further. Having a weaker unit, give ground in front of a stronger unit changes how a battle unfolds, and it forces you to adapt your tactics as they're happening. The slower battles of Pharaoh dynasties are fantastic, and you have enough time to really move troops around and react to what you're seeing on the field. It's so much fun, and I want to see more of that, right? I want to see that when I can actually push them into a river and that unit just dies. That'd be wild to see in a Total War game. And a system of unit push also stops blobs of low-tier crap levy from blocking bridges and gateways in the face of better armed infantry. In Warhammer, you can throw a magic blob at them and then it kills them all. Historical games need a better answer, and historically there was one. Right? You send in the best men and it clears out these spaces. You have to think about this. If you ever played the Shield Wall mod for Thrones of Britannia, the logic of its unit choice is actually based on a tabletop game called Age of Vikings, in that you have Levy, Warrior, and Elites. Now, each one does more damage and it's more survivable the higher up you go, but there are less of them, just like there would be on any battlefield. And it's something like that in here, where I can feel the difference in troops. Because saying this is a militia, but this is a militia with armor, doesn't feel good. It feels like a silly distinction. Likewise, the arbitrary divide between shock and melee cavalry does not work in the medieval Europe era. It's an idea they introduced back in Rome too, and I've never liked it. Heavy cavalry is heavy cavalry. They perform a particular function. They're heavily armored, they run in, they fight. That's what they do. They cause shock, they are melee. They're the same thing combined together. And recently, Total War has gotten just a little too happy to make variation number 12 of Black Orcs, but this one has a pink handle on his axe, so that one hits slightly harder, because sometimes less is more, right? And levy infantry is just levy infantry. Maybe they pull out a sword if the enemy gets too close, but I certainly shouldn't have to recruit an entire different unit of just sword levies. I don't need 20 choices. I need 4 impactful ones. And on that same thought, Age of Empires 4 introduced an incredible system for lance breakage for their French cavalry unit that I would love to see Total War use. When a unit charges in, a cavalry unit, they get up to speed, their lances drop, and when they impact, the lances break. And they are forced to use a sword or a mace or a whatever for about 2 minutes or so. And then, once you leave combat, they have lances again, and they can charge back in. It stops you from repeatedly cycle charging and respects the fact that these people are wearing armor. They have weapons that break, and there are actual tactics that you have to use to incorporate and work around these weaknesses. And generally, as I was saying above, the whole system of levy, regular, and retinue tiers just need to feel more impactful. I mean, you should always be fielding a mix of them, and they should never just upgrade out of a unit to make them pointless on the campaign map. I mean, nobody wants a button for a guy that you're never going to use again. What's the point of him? Let the units change and evolve over time. Levies can be re-equipped with halberds or, repurposed as archers. They're still levies. Do a different thing with them. Maybe spear and shield levies disappear entirely after a certain technology to be replaced by, halberd levies. Who knows? I mean, I recently spoke about this entire thing to a medieval literature professor, and he put it this way. The best games, the enemy evolves and changes as you play, so you can't continue to use the same tactic from the beginning to the end of your game. The challenges you are facing change, and you are forced to adapt and change with them or be overcome. In the medieval era, you couldn't just build another building tier to unlock the next tier of units and then doom stack your enemies. The first versions of Total War were built on the same ideas behind chess. The challenge came from adapting to styles of warfare that went from shield walls, which were countered by heavy cavalry, which were countered by very heavy infantry and archers, which were countered by cannons, and then massed pikemen and massed skirmishers. And then at the same time, having to manage all that, all those people and all the lords and their different personalities who may not want to come fight with you. I mean, maybe your noble lords are the only ones who field heavy cavalry, so you have to have them if you want that. And everything else is based on levies. Losing your noble units should feel like a real setback. And this idea of setbacks, peasant revolts, squabbles between lords that you have to choose between one lord or the other, or even a civil war where you have to choose which branch of your family you will support, a feature from Medieval 1, by the way, makes for a smaller world that is more engaging, right? It makes Give me some feasts with branching choices in them, and make me pick which gift to send to a nearby lord. Let's start squabbles with the church over land and then get injured in a joust. Total War can be more than just build, conquer, repeat, loop. And bringing in ideas from other games that have thrived in the last 20 years since Medieval 2 could make for a Medieval 3 unlike anything else Total War has ever been, and really set it apart from the fantasy titles. But what do you think of this vision for a Total War Medieval 3? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.